All right, welcome to another deep dive, everyone. Today, we are going to be tackling something that I know is like a top goal for many language learners out there, and that is truly thinking in another language.
Right.
Like a native speaker. I know that's something I've struggled with personally.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited to, kind of pick apart and dissect all of the amazing source material that you guys shared
Absolutely.
to prepare for this episode.
Yes.
So our mission today is really to try to extract the most insightful nuggets, the most useful, actionable advice to help you listening at home actually move beyond mental translation.
Yeah.
And, achieve that much more direct
That's it.
connection with the language.
I think a good way to think about this is like moving from consciously translating everything to intuitively understanding.
Right.
So it's that shift. And it's kind of like moving from driving when you first start driving. You have to think about every single gear change,
For sure.
And eventually you get to a point where you just know what to do.
Right. It's like second nature.
Exactly.
You're not even thinking about it.
So the aim isn't necessarily to perfectly mimic a native speaker because we all have our own unique voices and experiences, but it's more about reaching that level of proficiency where your brain processes the language with simile automaticity and intuition.
I love that. Automaticity and intuition.
Yeah.
So let's get into what's actually happening in our brains, because you shared some fascinating research on the cognitive advantages of thinking in another language.
Yes.
It's not just about communication. It actually changes the way we think, right?
It really does. So what's interesting is when we process information in a non-native tongue, it creates the sort of cognitive buffer because it forces us to analyze things a bit more deliberately. And this can actually reduce some of the emotional biases that we might have when thinking in our native language.
Oh, interesting.
So it's like having this slight distance that encourages more objective decision-making and rational thinking.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And on top of that, engaging with another language is like a huge workout for your brain.
I can imagine.
So it strengthens those cognitive muscles and can lead to improved memory, problem-solving skills, and overall mental agility.
That's a huge benefit.
It is.
So I think that begs the question then for you listening, how do you actually start making that leap to direct thought?
Right.
And one of the things that came up time and time again in the research was this idea of immersion.
Immersion, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, the direct method, which is where you're exclusively using the target language, is really effective. But you can create your own immersion even if you're not living in a country where that language is spoken.
Right.
So things like switching your devices, your phone, your computer to the target language.
I've done that.
Labeling things around your house.
That's a good one.
Little things like that can make a huge difference.
Right, I see.
Just these small, consistent exposures to the language help your brain start to bypass that translation step.
Yeah. Okay. So it's about setting up your environment, creating those opportunities.
Exactly.
And it's almost like tricking your brain into thinking in the target language.
Yeah, you're sort of tricking it into thinking that it needs to function in that language.
I love that.
And then there's also the importance of actively practicing those direct thoughts.
Okay. How do you do that?
So starting with simple things, right?
Okay.
Describe the things around you, your daily routine, but try to do it directly in the target language. Make a conscious effort to think in the language, not just translate your native language thoughts into it.
That's a great tip. And is that where monolingual dictionaries come in?
Yes, absolutely. Because it forces you to understand words within the target language's own web of meaning. Rather than always relating it back to the equivalent.
To your native language.
In your native language.
Right.
And this can be really challenging at first, but it's so rewarding.
Yeah, it's like you're really building those neural pathways.
Yes, exactly.
And kind of solidifying those connections.
And then there are things like journaling or even just having internal dialogues in the target language.
Oh, that's interesting, like talking to yourself.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And it might feel silly at first, but it really helps.
That's a really good tip. I like that.
Yeah.
So let's move on to vocabulary now.
Okay.
Because there was a huge emphasis in the research on the importance of learning vocabulary like a native speaker.
Right.
So what does that actually mean in practice?
So native speakers, they acquire words through exposure, through reading, listening to authentic content like books, movies, podcasts, and they infer meaning from context. It's not just about memorizing lists of words. It's about encountering them in real life situations and figuring out what they mean.
So it's about understanding how the words are actually used.
Exactly. And spaced repetition is another really helpful technique for reinforcing what you learn.
Reminding me what that is.
Yeah, so it's basically reviewing new words at increasing intervals.
Okay.
So you might review a word after a day, then after 3 days, then a week, and so on.
Okay, so it's not just cramming and hoping it sticks.
No, it's about strategically spacing out your review.
Right.
To take advantage of the way our brains forget things.
Gotcha. And I think it's also important to remember that even native speakers don't know every single word
Of course not.
in their language, right?
Yeah, it's a continuous process of learning and encountering new words.
Right, and I think that can be really reassuring for language learners, knowing that it's not about achieving some sort of perfect, complete knowledge.
And it's also about thinking about how we learned our first language, right? It was through use, it was through personal association.
Yeah.
And sometimes, yes, through deliberate study.
Right.
But a lot of it was just through encountering language in our everyday lives.
For sure. And then we have things like idiomatic expressions.
Oh, yeah.
Those fun little phrases that don't translate literally.
You love those.
Yeah, they're really tricky.
Yeah.
But they're so deeply rooted in culture. So you'll pick them up through that authentic exposure by understanding the cultural context.
Right.
And a good tip is to keep a running list.
Oh, like an idiom journal.
Yeah, like an idiom journal. And actively try to use them in your speaking and writing because it adds
That's a great idea.
that really native-like flavor.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so what about grammar?
Ah, yes, grammar, the bugbear.
The dreaded grammar, but it's so important.
It is.
And it's more than just rules on a page, right?
Right.
Think about it. You intuitively know what sounds right in your native language. That comes from years and years of exposure to correct grammar.
So it's not like we're consciously applying grammar rules all the time.
No, not at all.
It's just something that we've internalized.
Exactly.
So extensive reading and listening in your target language will help you build that same intuitive feel for grammar. And what's really important is to focus on understanding the meaning, what's often called comprehensible input.
Okay, so it's not about getting bogged down in the technicalities.
No, it's about understanding.
It's about absorbing the language.
Absorbing the language, exactly.
Okay.
Use grammar books as a resource when you need them, but let immersion be your primary teacher.
Right, like use those grammar books as references, but not as the main learning tool.
Exactly.
Okay, and I think another thing that came up in the research was the importance of actually seeing grammar in real-world contexts.
Absolutely.
Like not just in textbooks, but in actual conversations, in books, in movies.
Yeah, because that's how you really start to internalize how it's used.
Right, so it's not just these isolated examples.
Exactly.
It's actually seeing how it functions in the real world.
And it's also really important to get feedback
Oh, yeah, for sure.
on your own speaking and writing. Language partners, tutors, teachers can be so valuable for this because they can point out.
Right, they can highlight those areas where you might be making mistakes.
Exactly.
And help you to improve.
Yeah, and it's all about practice.
Practice, practice, practice.
Practice makes perfect, or as close to perfect as we can get.
So one of the things that I found really fascinating in the research was this idea that language and culture are so deeply intertwined.
Oh, absolutely.
They're inseparable.
Yeah, you can't really have one without the other.
Right.
Language reflects a culture's priorities, its worldview. You know, it's evident in the vocabulary, the idioms we use.
Right. Like certain languages might have more words for snow
Exactly.
if they live in a place with a lot of snow.
Absolutely. Or for different types of snow.
Right. Exactly.
And cultural schemas, those shared understandings that we have, they shape how language is used.
So it's about understanding those underlying cultural values.
Yeah, and how they're expressed through language. And some research even suggests that there's this thing called linguistic relativity,
Okay.
which is the idea that the language we speak can actually influence how we think and perceive the world.
Whoa. That's mind-blowing.
It is. So, for example, the way a language categorizes objects or describes colors can impact how speakers of that language remember those things or even perceive them visually.
So it's not just a tool for communication, it's actually shaping
It shapes our reality.
our perception of reality.
Yeah, and to really think like a native speaker, you need to grasp those cultural nuances, the nonverbal cues, the humor, the social norms.
It's about going beyond just the words themselves.
Exactly.
And understanding the whole cultural context.
Yeah, and this is where things can get really interesting, right? Because
Yeah.
you start to see how language is so much more than just a set of rules.
It's a reflection of a culture's history, its values, its beliefs.
It's a living, breathing thing
I love
that
that.
evolves and changes.
So I think this leads to a really important question for our listeners,
Okay.
many of whom might not have the opportunity to live abroad.
Right.
So how can we create effective immersion
Yes.
at home?
So the key is to maximize your exposure to the language.
Okay.
Seek out opportunities to interact with native speakers.
Mm.
Even if it's online, join language exchange groups.
Right. Use technology to your advantage.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Immerse yourself in all forms of media, movies, music, podcasts, books,
Yeah. And even like YouTube videos.
YouTube videos, anything you can get your hands on.
I feel like social media is a really great tool for that.
It is, and even small actions like labeling items around your house.
Oh, yeah. We talked about that.
Changing your phone settings.
Those little things can really add up.
They really can.
So it's about being intentional and creating those opportunities for yourself.
Exactly. The key is to actively engage, listen attentively, try to understand, and don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Yeah, that's so important.
That's all part of the process.
So how do we know if our thinking is starting to align more with a native speaker?
That's a great question.
What are some telltale signs?
So you'll start to notice an intuitive sense of grammar.
Okay.
Like you just know what sounds right.
You don't have to think about the rules anymore.
Exactly. A more natural flow and rhythm in your speech. A comfortable use of idioms and collocations.
Okay.
And you'll also develop a better understanding of pragmatics.
Remind me what that is.
Yeah. Appropriate to say
Okay.
in different social situations.
Right. So it's about understanding the social context.
Exactly. And ultimately, your processing of the language will become faster and more automatic.
So you're not translating in your head as much.
Exactly. You're thinking directly in the target language.
That's the goal.
That's the ultimate goal.
So it's really about cultivating that overall feel for the language.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
The rhythm, the intonation, the way that native speakers actually use it.
And techniques like shadowing can be really helpful for this.
Oh, tell me more about shadowing.
So shadowing is basically listening to native speech
Okay.
and then trying to imitate it as closely as possible.
Oh, that's a good one.
So you're paying attention to the sounds, the intonation.
So it's about training your ear and your mouth to work together.
Exactly.
And I think engaging with music can also be really helpful for this.
Absolutely.
Like listening to songs in the target language, singing along.
Yeah, because music is so full of rhythm and intonation.
It's a fun way to absorb those patterns.
Exactly.
So this has been a fantastic deep dive.
It has.
I feel like we've really covered a lot of ground.
We have.
And I think the main takeaway is that thinking like a native speaker is an ongoing journey. It's not a destination that you arrive at.
It's a process.
It's a continuous process of engagement with the language and the culture.
Yeah, and the rewards are immense.
They are.
More effective communication, a richer understanding of another culture, and all those wonderful cognitive benefits that we talked about.
And I think that's something that's really important to emphasize. It's not just about the language itself.
Right.
It's about all of these other benefits.
It's about expanding your horizons.
Expanding your horizons.
It's
Exactly.
opening up your mind.
I love that. So here's a final thought for you listening at home. What's one aspect of the culture behind the language you're learning that particularly intrigues you? How might exploring that further deepen your connection to the language itself? And what's one small immersion activity you can commit to today
Yeah,
to nudge your brain towards thinking directly in the language?
that's a great challenge.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
See you next time.